All right. Let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Miley Dana Schoonover. I'm one of the community managers here at NPRN. I believe my colleagues Alana Powell, Eric Cardenas, and perhaps Gary Clark from Santa Barbara Foundation are on the call as well. So hello to my team. Our webinar today is entitled Working Together for Transformative Change, Our Nonprofit Sector's Role in Advancing Equity, and is co-presented with the Fund for Santa Barbara. I am very excited for today's discussion, and we had over 145 individuals registered for today's call. So there's a very clear interest resonating throughout our sector to delve into the topic of equity. Folks are still trickling in. So it's a very excited for today's topic. It should be a lively one. Just a few brief housekeeping items. One, right off the bat, just wanted to let folks be aware that today's webinar is being recorded. So just for everyone's full consent, if you'd rather not be recorded, feel free to go off camera. We are in a meeting presentation today, just so we could all be together. There will be a brief Q&A at the end of today's webinar that we're allotting about 20 or 25 minutes for. However, since we're participating in a meeting format, we won't be relying on a Q&A functionality, but rather the raised hand functionality. So if you're unfamiliar with that, you can find the ability to raise your virtual hand under the reactions column in the navigation bar at the bottom of your screen. And yeah, myself as well as Kathleen will be monitoring the chat as well if you would prefer to add your questions there. So I want to go ahead and introduce today's speakers so that we could get started. We are joined today by Kathleen Knight, who is the Capacity Building Manager for the Fund for Santa Barbara, as well as Marcos Vargas, who is the Executive Director at the Fund for Santa Barbara. Thank you so much to you both for your leadership in this work and for facilitating today's topic. And with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Kathleen.
Thank you so much, Miley. And thank you to everyone who's able to join us today. Regional Equity Initiative has just been something that we at the Fund for Santa Barbara are just really passionate about, have spent a lot of time and energy and effort to put forward. So we're really excited to speak with you all today. And before we get started, I do just want to give a special thank you to NPRN. They're a vital resource for our sector as our digital nonprofit hub. And I really encourage you, your staff, and organizations to register and utilize the space. They're just a phenomenal megaphone in the sector for events, for resources, and communications. And with that, I'll pass it over to our wonderful Executive Director, Marcos Vargas, to start us off.
Well, thank you, Kathleen. And I'm with you, Kathleen. Much thanks to Eric, Miley, and the whole NPR team for making this possible and for their overall service to our nonprofit community. Thank you all so much. Again, my name is Marcos Vargas. I'm the Executive Director of the Fund for Santa Barbara, and I'm so very happy to be with you today. Before we continue further, I want to acknowledge that the Central Coast Regional Equity Report itself could not have been accomplished without the collaborative partnership between the USC Equity Research Institute, the Blum Center on Poverty, Inequality, and Democracy, and the Fund for Santa Barbara, as well as the day-to-day amazing work of a 5-member core team, our 10-member steering committee, the leadership of our 26-member advisory committee, and over 130 people, community leaders who participated in our 16 community consultations. And of course, the grant support from about 12 foundation partners. All these folks are listed in our report as well as the executive summary, and encourage you to check that out. And again, we thank all our supporters for their assistance in making this a reality. You know, I have to say I've been really amazed at how positively this initiative has been received throughout our region since our launch in December of last year. While much of the data is very sobering, we've seen many community groups, government elected officials and staff, and the philanthropic leaders in the region express their excitement over having such an important data to help them and help inform their efforts to address the many issues of inequity in our region. Folks from all these sectors are exploring and in some cases already implementing ways to effectively utilize the data and reports regional equity framing to inform and support this important work. So what's the backstory of this initiative? Well, as a progressive community foundation with a strong social justice mission, the fund's original idea was to create a tool primarily for use in community organizing and policy advocacy. And while not all of us attending this convening today are actively engaged in these types of social change strategies, certainly the way that we traditionally think of them, in actuality, we are all advocates. As members of the nonprofit sector, we are advocates for our programs, for our constituents, doing all we can to gain support for continued or increased services to address community needs or to change systems and policies that create these needs. This includes fundraising and solicitations for foundation and government grants to support our work. You know, making the case for our program funding and public policy reform requires the utilization of good data from reputable sources to substantiate the need and the complexity of the issues we're all trying to address. As we hoped it would, our original project, has truly been evolving over the last 2 years and even over the last several months. Since its launching in December, it has gone from a one-time report to an ongoing initiative to advance an equity agenda region-wide. And I have to say, we all have a role to play in this effort, certainly in using the data and the report's regional equity frame, but also in contributing directly to this initiative for the benefit of our organizations, our sectors, and collectively to advance equity throughout our region. Even from our early conceptualization of this project in late 2019, we originally thought that we would undertake a study that would, in essence, work on making the case that equity matters in our region. However, both the pandemic and the national call for racial justice has served to elevate racial injustice and the many deep social, economic, environmental inequities that have existed long before, while also bringing to us a transformative moment where we've recognized that there's really no going back to the old normal and that the time for meaningful change is now. This first report was a big lift, and honestly, we were unable to come close to covering in the report all the important issues of inequity facing our communities. Certainly much more equity research needs to be conducted around important issues like K-12 education and criminal justice reform, to name just 2 areas. In reality, we need a much larger body of research, which we hope to contribute to in our next report in 2023.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Currently, there is also a call for proposals to researchers at UCSB to conduct new research targeting our region. And we and our university researchers therefore need to hear from you to come up with important local research projects. I'd like to conclude by saying this initiative has room for all of us. And after today and in subsequent convenings, I hope you see more clearly the role your organization might play in this effort to advance an effective equity agenda in our region. I'd like to now hand it off to Kathleen, who will give an overview of the Central Coast Regional Equity Report. Kathleen.
Great, thank you so much, Marcos. I'm just going to go ahead and start sharing my screen with you all here. So first of all, I just want to thank you all again so much for the space today. And as Marcos has mentioned, data can play a really important role in community work, whether you're a direct service provider, an advocacy-based organization, or a funding organization. Communities have lived experience and knowledge of the historical factors, resources, and issues created by inequitable systems that do not meet their needs nor aspirations. They are also the ones who are already actively engaged in advocating for and creating solutions that meet the diverse, nuanced, and intersectional needs of the community. Research, therefore, must be community-based and community-driven. Community-engaged research centers on a community-first approach when asking questions, gathering and analyzing data, and leveraging data. Ultimately, strong community-based research provides advocates with tools to empower community members to speak truth to power and movement building, a critical component to laying the groundwork for transformative change in the Central Coast. From the beginning, the intent of the Central Coast Regional Equity Study was to provide important collaborative research resources to community organizing and policy advocacy efforts in the region. However, as Marcos has mentioned, we are all advocates for our work and our programs and for the communities we serve. While this short presentation is just a small glimpse into the kind of information available in the Regional Equity Study, there is a wealth of intersectional information and data that we encourage you all to leverage for your own purposes, in developing and expanding your programs, in securing funding for your organizations, and in expanding your power for advocating for and with the constituencies you serve. This report has been over 2 years in the making and has been guided by a vision of regional equity, one that acknowledges our shared history, our socioeconomic integration and interdependence, and our long and growing history of bi-county activism. Our dynamic research approach sought to be multidimensional and inclusive, accomplished through community consultations to inform and elevate key issue areas, and quantitative US Census-based data analysis. Inequity is something that we can feel deeply within our region, and this work is meant to not only provide a data-driven analysis of the crises of inequity facing Ventura and Santa Barbara counties, but also to serve as a benchmark to track progress over time towards a more just and equitable future. And most importantly, to serve as an action-based initiative framework to advance a regional vision of equity within the Central Coast, which we'll discuss together a bit later. Now, in order to do this, we first have to understand where we are at. We are living in a time of unparalleled change on the Central Coast and throughout the world. The depth and extent of regional inequity has been brought to the surface by the devastating, racially disparate impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. But this inequity is rooted in structural trends, policies, and practices that have been shaping the region for decades. The two-county region faces a multidimensional crisis of inequality that weighs most heavily on working class communities of color. We are a rapidly diversifying region, and inequality in our economy has taken shape amidst major transformations in its racial and ethnic demography. While Santa Barbara and Ventura counties became majority BIPOC between 2000 and 2010, increasing demographic diversity has not resulted in an equitable distribution of the region's prosperity. When considering this rising inequality over the past 40 years, the highest income earners in the region saw their real incomes grow by over 20%, while the lowest earners in the region saw their incomes shrink by nearly 20%. Essentially, the wealthy keep getting wealthier and the poor keep getting poorer. Key to sustaining this are employment practices that systematically undervalue the skills and contributions of the workers who drive the agricultural, service, and tourism industries which provide the foundation of the local economy. Also key are the skyrocketing housing prices and extreme rent burden in the region. Ventura County is the 5th most rent burdened metro area in the United States, and Santa Barbara County ranks 11th. These practices have put the Central Coast at the leading edge of inequality trends that have gripped the nation for decades. It's important to note that this widening divide we see is bigger within the region than in the rest of the United States. Low-wage workers, women, and people of color have paid an exceptionally high price, bearing the brunt of these widening disparities and extreme economic inequality. BIPOC populations are disproportionately vulnerable to economic hardship, with Latinx and Native populations experiencing the highest rates of economic hardship in both counties. So what does the cost of this inequality mean? Structural inequities have been compounded by a pattern of systemic racial injustice that denies people of color equal access to the rights, opportunities, and protections everyone needs to thrive. This manifests in a system of public safety that has done more to criminalize than to protect communities of color, and in environmental practices that leave these communities disproportionately vulnerable to the harms of pollution and climate change. Such issues are further detailed in the full report, and I encourage you to delve into these issue areas. Racial uprisings in the COVID-19 pandemic have also underscored this fundamental injustice of inequality. They shifted the framework of our research, and here's what we came to sharply understand. From early on, it became apparent that the pandemic's heaviest burdens would be borne by households already experiencing social and economic disadvantages, including frontline or essential workers without the option to stay at home, shelter in place, and remain employed, as well as undocumented workers and mixed status households ineligible for unemployment assistance. The pandemic's burdens would also be borne by those experiencing overcrowded or otherwise insecure housing conditions. Overwhelmingly, these key risk factors associated with housing and frontline occupations fall most heavily on people of color. When considering cumulative data on COVID case rates by county, we see that communities of color have been most impacted by the virus. Additionally, these BIPOC communities that have been disproportionately affected by COVID and the housing crisis also face significant obstacles to obtaining important services. This includes digital access to schools, service providers, and civic organizations who turn to the internet to sustain essential activities. This also includes healthcare access, with dramatic divides in coverage between Latinx and white residents. This divide is even more dramatic by immigration status, as undocumented immigrant residents have the highest proportion of uninsured individuals, with a particularly extreme gap among seniors. So what has change looked like? The swell of community-based voices for structural and systemic change is anchored in a robust infrastructure of intersectional social justice organizing, in which people of color, and youth in particular, have played an essential role. However, progressive change coalitions face critical impediments to political mobilization on the Central Coast as well. One obstacle is the persistence of the racial generation gap, which describes divergence in the racial and ethnic composition of the nation's rapidly diversifying, increasingly BIPOC youth, and gradually diversifying, but still predominantly white senior populations. This demographic divergence is tied to a growing sense of social and cultural distance between older and younger generations, and to diminish support among seniors, who are far more likely to vote than younger generations, for spending on education and other youth-serving public investments. Challenging though the racial, generational, and other political voice factors, such as voter mobilization gaps may be, they are by no means insurmountable. For one thing, demographically rooted political tensions are subject to change through public outreach, through education, and through coalition building across racial groups and generations. Community-based organizing can occur around the vital importance of investing in youth in order to ensure the current and future vitality of the regions. The single most important message from our community consultations was, if not now, when? There is no going back, and this moment can and must be an opportunity for change. So how do we get there? We can start by strengthening political infrastructures, recognizing previous successes, and building from an activated community. So where do we go from here? As we look to the post-pandemic future then, it is imperative to set our sights appropriately, not on a return to an inequitable normal, but on a transition to a just and equitable future on the Central Coast. Justice and equity are not only crucial values in their own right, but essential for regional health, prosperity, and sustainability. The Central Coast Regional Equity Initiative aims to deepen our understanding of regional disparities, facilitate a region-wide conversation, and support the planning and implementation of initiatives focused on advancing social, health, environmental, and economic equity. The report emphasizes the intersectionality of all issue areas, and I highly encourage you to read the executive summary as well as the full study to delve into specific issue areas and leverage this information for your own organization's benefit. The report is not meant to be prescriptive. Rather, it's meant to establish a framework for understanding and advocating for regional equity. The initiative serves as a way to evolve and advance regional equity. This initiative is an action-based opportunity for us all to reflect on our own organizations, programs, policies, etc., and find opportunities to engage with advancing equity more deeply within our own work and within the region. Most importantly, this work is not something we can accomplish alone, and we need your commitment to advancing equity in order to transform the region. Now we'll move to Marcos, who will speak to this framework outlined in the report, as well as cover our 11 principles and priorities, which serve as guideposts within the agenda framework for regional equity. Marcos?
Thank you, Kathleen. As I mentioned earlier, the report is more than a collection of data on inequities in our region. It's also about providing a framework to help inform a movement for equity in Ventura and Santa Barbara counties. I should also mention that our intent is to include San Luis Obispo County in the next report. So while we never intended this report to be prescriptive or to promote a particular policy or to address many of the issues it covers, we did conclude the report with a set of 11 principles and priorities, with the idea of starting a conversation on regional equity while providing a framework and direction for what it might look like to undertake a collective effort to move forward a more just and equitable Central Coast region. In the interest of time, I'm going to go through these principles and priorities quickly. And again, each is elaborated on within the report. Our first principle and priority is respect the rights and experiences of Indigenous people. In this principle, we honor the knowledge, cultural traditions, and resilience that has sustained our region's first people, the Chumash and Tatavian people, supporting their ongoing struggle for self-determination, while also drawing from Native knowledge and worldview to inform our shared stewardship of the land and interconnection of all life. Number two, center equity and justice as foundational economic values. In this principle, we center equity as the sign of economic strength, where we embrace goals such as closing the racial and gender wage gaps as benchmarks for economic success. Number 3, invest in inclusive and universally accessible infrastructures of opportunity and social provision. The basis of this principle is that on the Central Coast, we all have the right to such social goods as affordable healthcare, housing, and quality education, and that they all must be made accessible to everybody, regardless of income, ability, language, citizenship, or immigration status. Number 4, advance racial and intersectional justice. As we all know, the transformation to a more just and equitable region requires systemic change, and therefore this effort must be informed by racial and intersectional justice that cuts across multiple issue areas. Number 5, recognize, respect, and protect immigrant rights, civic integration, and political voice. As the report clearly points out, immigrants are an integral part of the Central Coast region and essential to our regional economy. Local governments must be more aware, responsive, and accountable to immigrant communities. Certainly more can be done to promote and support efforts for immigrant integration through grassroots organizing, naturalization drives, and voter registration campaigns. Number 6, protect tenants, preserve communities, and make housing affordable for all. What more can we say? We're all very much aware of our region's housing crisis. While all the issues discussed in this report are important, housing sits at the intersection of so much inequality in our region. This is why we decided to elevate it. Number 7, be a leader in the environmental and climate justice. Here we have a chance to live up to our reputation as the home of the modern environmental movement by showing the rest of the country a path towards a more sustainable and just environment. Toward this, we have a long history of environmental activism to draw from, including recent successful environmental justice campaigns against fossil fuel power plants, the creation of an LNG, liquefied natural terminal off the coast of Oxnard, and the use of hazardous pesticides on commercial farms. Number 8, bridge digital divides for underserved communities. As the pandemic has clearly shown us, full and unencumbered digital access is now a basic necessity for full participation in economic, political, social, and civic life. In the report, we highlight that Latinx and Black communities are the least digitally connected, something that was only exacerbated during the pandemic as children struggled to attend school remotely and folks tried to get appointments for COVID tests and vaccinations. Number 9, create platforms for collaborative, community-engaged equity research. Kathleen touched on this. And as you're hearing today, this report touches on a wide range of issues using a model of community-engaged research. However, as an ongoing multi-year initiative, this is really only the beginning. A much deeper dive is needed on important issues such as K-12 education and criminal justice reform, among others. Towards these ends, region-wide active collaboration will be needed from our universities, community colleges, philanthropic organizations, and community-based groups. Number 10, build from our victories. And there have been many victories in our region to learn from. Some of us remember the victories from the living wage movement in Ventura and Santa Barbara counties in the 1990s, victories that laid the groundwork for numerous other successful campaigns over the years, including several important environmental justice wins, as well as more recent victories during the pandemic for increased funding for tenant protections, services for the unhoused, and the expansion of state financial assistance to immigrant families severely impacted by COVID. Number 11, open avenues to participatory democracy. This principle and priority centers around the important need to have diverse voices at the table. Change happens when communities are engaged, including actively participating in the electoral process. Organizations rooted in the region's diverse communities are needed more than ever to empower marginalized groups by activating new and occasional voters to build electoral power, to make their voices heard with lawmakers, and to build coalitions across groups, including those groups that have historically been excluded from the political process. So these are our 11 principles and priorities. Now let's explore how each of us and our organizations can be part of this effort to advance an equity agenda in our region. Kathleen, you want to put those questions up? We have 3 questions for you, and I'm sure there's going to be questions you're going to have for us that you, by all means, put into the chat, and we'll see if we can answer them today. If not, try and answer them later. But the 3 questions we put before you is, what do you need in order to advance or start to advance equity in the work that you're currently engaged in? 2, what would you like to see in the next report? What would be helpful for you? And 3, what are your thoughts on what an intersectional equity movement in our region looks like? So with that, I'd just like to open it up for just a community conversation and discussion on how we can collectively build our capacity to move forward in equity agenda in the Ventura and Santa Barbara County Central Coast. Kathleen, I think you're gonna be taking questions, right?
Yes. So as Miley mentioned at the beginning, feel free to use the raise hand feature on Zoom, and we'll call on you and you can unmute yourself. And again, we really want to open this up to community that's here today. Whether you've had an opportunity to really deeply engage with the initiative, or even if it's your first time really being aware of what we're aiming to achieve. We would just, love to hear from you and love for this really to be a conversation for community and between community. And Garrett Wong, I see your hand raised. Thanks so much. Go ahead.
Hi, thank you. My name is Garrett Wong. I'm the Climate Program Manager for the County of Santa Barbara, and really pleased to see the support. I've been aware of it as it's been going on for quite a while. There's so much here to react to and to respond to, and it's really great to have this information here. I wanted to lift up a few things that the county's doing, and also a few opportunities that I think would be of great interest to this group. So one thing is that the county's been working on several long-range climate planning related efforts, and it's called broadly, it's called the One Climate Initiative, and we have an equity advisory and outreach committee. And it would be great if different organizations continue to be a part of it. I believe a number of people on that committee are here today. We also have what's called the Santa Barbara County Regional Climate Collaborative, and the Equity Advisory Committee that I just mentioned is a part of that collaborative. And we're seeking to shift power dynamics within that collaborative to really lift up the Equity Advisory Committee and its role and how it shapes and shifts forward-looking climate policy projects and programs around the region. And then another thing I'll mention is just beyond the county, there's a pretty big effort going on called the Community Economic Resilience Fund, or SURF as it's known. And we're a part of the Central Coast region from Ventura all the way up to Santa Cruz and San Benito County. And the idea is that the state of California is looking to fund the Central Coast region, among other regions across the state, to develop a new regional economic development plan or economic recovery plan. And it's meant to focus on 3 things. 1 is economic recovery from COVID. 2 is shifting our local economies to carbon neutrality. And 3 is lifting up vulnerable and marginalized populations. And so tomorrow at 2:00, the 3 regional economic development organizations that span the Central Coast are holding a kickoff meeting, a virtual roundtable at 2:00 tomorrow. So I will add some links into the chat, but I think it'd be really great if people in this group and the information that's been presented here today would be lifted up into that discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Garrett. And I will say, first of all, thank you for the work that you are doing. And I think something that was really apparent in the regional equity study and just within the initiative itself, is that really all of these issues are so intersectional. And, how can we talk about our environmental future and climate without talking about the communities that are most impacted, without talking about climate justice and environmental justice? So just really appreciate the work that you're doing, and the equity lens that it sounds like the county is utilizing to approach working for solutions. And on our end at the Fund for Santa Barbara, please send that information along. We as a regional intermediary and a connective point to and between a lot of different organizations are always happy to share that, and always happy to uplift the work that's going on within not only Santa Barbara County, but within our Central Coast region as a whole. So thank you. And I'm going to go ahead and look in the chat here, but please feel free to, again, use the raised hand feature on Zoom, share a little bit to, as to what your thoughts related to the questions are, or a bit about the work that you're doing. Rebecca, I see your hand raised. Why don't you go ahead?
Hi, Marcos and Kathleen. Really great presentation. So thank you for sharing. Let me lower my hand real quick. Yeah, so to backtrack a little bit, I come from PathPoint, and we're a nonprofit in Santa Barbara that provides services to individuals with developmental disabilities and behavioral health diagnoses. And I think that that's exactly what I'd love to see a little bit more of in the next report, is a little bit more data and representation for the disability community as a whole, whether this be, individuals with developmental disabilities or individuals with behavioral health diagnoses. I think something we've really learned throughout the COVID-19 pandemic is that these individuals faced a lot of the same issues highlighted throughout the report, especially, the digital divide, unemployment was a huge one, lack of access in general to community resources. So in the next report, I'd really love to see some more data representing the disability population across Ventura, Santa Barbara, and hopefully SLO as well. And even really some community consultations from this population as well would be really meaningful.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. And I think brings up just a great point as to, this report is by no means comprehensive, nor did it really adequately address, and include all populations. And I think that especially with our disabled community, there is so much intersectionality between issues, for example, of race and gender and socioeconomic status, that also are compounded by an individual's, representation within the disabled community. And so I really appreciate you elevating that. Would also encourage you to, as we're looking towards the next iteration of the report, a lot of the work will be, or a lot of the communications will be with community. And so ways in which, you're connected or information and access that you have, we would love to, collaborate. We're a very small team. It's just myself and Marcos, our collaborators at the Blum Center. So really trying to frame it from a perspective of, okay, how can we engage together, and what are the networks and the resources that we all bring, so that we can address questions such as yours, and also include, work on greater inclusivity within the next iteration of the report. Marcos, anything you'd like to add? Yeah.
Only that, we would like to include secondary data as well. And we have put together a dedicated website. So if folks are familiar with other research and reports done that are related to this region around many of these issue areas, we would really appreciate for you to forward those to us so that we can, they can inform the next report, but possibly also be included on our website. So again, please, if you have that kind of information, please forward that on to us.
Great, thank you. I'm just going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen here so that we can have a bit more of a face-to-face discussion. But Jennifer Smith, I see your hand raised. Go ahead, please.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jennifer Smith. I'm the Executive Director at Legal Aid Foundation of Santa Barbara County. A lot to digest, and there's probably like 100 things I could talk about. One thing I see so much, at least in Santa Barbara County, is a real, and I thought your data on sort of the age versus racial and ethnic makeup in our community was really informative, because it reflects the divide I see in all discussions around housing. Everything in and related to housing in our community, I really perceive a stark, there's always been a divide, but it seems to even be getting worse in terms of the conversations from who I think are well-intended and meaningful people who are already homeowners, and those who are trying to work, stay, and stay present in Santa Barbara County and are struggling with being able to access housing, is just an ongoing tension that we see, right, in all kinds of public meetings, conversations, and forums. I don't know that I have an answer there, but I'll just say that data just reflects anecdotally what I perceive in a lot of those ongoing discussions. And I don't know if there's opportunities for more continued community conversations, sort of between, I guess there's an age, I think there's an age factor there, as well as a racial and ethnic factor. But continuing to have, tough conversations on those issues, I think, is important. And finding areas where people can come together. And then the other thing I just wanted to flag in terms of our work that we're thinking about is we do continue to have a program to assist distressed homeowners, people who are at risk of foreclosure. And it's a little hard to, it's sometimes hard to imagine in this economy that there are still people in those circumstances, but it is happening. And what we're seeing, our understanding of the data is that there's also that racial divide there too, that increasingly the disparities in terms of who's getting access to home ownership is growing more and more stark. And so that is something, just as a legal aid community statewide, we're thinking about, talking about. I don't know if we have solutions, but there's so many important conversations going on with housing, and particularly rental housing, which is absolutely critical. But then there's also this component of who is or is not a homeowner also remains, I think, an important part of the conversation. So a lot of stuff to digest. I'm also just thinking about, how I think for all of our various organizations here, presenting this information to our board of directors and others. But those are just some preliminary thoughts.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. And you hit the nail on the head. Housing is critical when we are in a crisis. We had a briefing with policymakers in the philanthropic sector of the two-county region. And in many ways, it's local government that has the most authority around land use and could do much more. And then we also have the housing elements that are being reviewed and revised now. So it's a really critical time. And and also, the philanthropic sector needs to play a more role in helping to finance housing development. So there's opportunities there. As you say, we need to come together. The Blum Center has been sponsoring, along with the fund, a series of forums on housing crisis. Kathleen, maybe you can mention that really briefly.
Yes, thank you. I just put the link in the chat for anyone who's interested. I know that this is a particular issue area that the Blum Center has been working quite diligently to, create conversation and start to address. And one thing I really want to uplift, Jennifer, too, that you mentioned was that what we've what we've presented today, speaks to a bit of the anecdotal evidence that right? And by being engaged in the work, by being engaged and knowing intimately what the housing crisis looks like, what it feels like. I think that's something that is so important about this report, and something that came up at one of our advisory committee meetings was, we can all see and feel inequity within the region, but for so long it's just been chalked up to, oh, that's anecdotal. Well, I think the power behind this report is that we can no longer say that these inequities are anecdotal. We have the data to prove just exactly how inequitable this region is, how much of a burden falls on communities of color, on working communities. And so I think being able to leverage that data in the work that you're doing, and in your programs to say, this very much there is a long documented history of inequity, and here's exactly what it looks like, I think can be a really powerful way to back up the work that you're doing at Legal Aid, to back up all the work that we're doing in our communities and on behalf of our constituencies. So thank you. And I hope, if there's one main takeaway from today's event is that this data is here to support the work that you're doing, and to be, either a way to argue, okay, this is no longer anecdotal, as a way to leverage funding and leverage opportunities. I did see Lauren Jafar had put in the chat, what we need is more funders willing to support advocacy and equity projects, including intersectional and multidisciplinary collaboratives. The fund is great as this, but others need to step up. The Fund for Santa Barbara really seriously takes our commitment to influencing philanthropy. So the way that we do philanthropy, the way that we make funding decisions, which is our funding decisions are made by community members, and what we do within the philanthropic space to influence others to do the same and others to take on more of a lens of equity remains very important. But it takes the work of other similarly minded funders, right, to share that message and spread that message. The Fund for Santa Barbara is absolutely committed to equity within funding, and advancing this framework within our own work. So just wanted to mention that as well as mention, I saw that our grants associate was able to hop on the call, but if you are an organization who is working on advocacy efforts, and specifically as it relates to equity, yes, please apply for funding from the Fund for Santa Barbara. I also did see a question in the chat from Judy Hawkins, who asked, can you say more about the principle on creating platforms for collaboration? And then follow up to that, are these digital platforms? Marcos, do you want to take a pass at that? I can jump in.
Are you talking about collaboration? Which principle, just so I can remember, because they were all really have a collaborative element to them. Are you talking about the research piece, or?
It did not specify. I'm not sure if Judy's on, if you want to just unmute yourself and let us know. But I think that is a big piece of the—
if I can say something about the research element, because that's where there's a real need. Again, this report only touched on a number of issues of equity, but so much more research needs to be done. And we have UCSB here in our region. We also have Cal Lutheran University and Cal State Channel Islands and others. We really need to engage them and really hold them accountable to a degree on conducting research relevant to our local communities. We had a real hard time pulling a lot of data together. USC did an incredible job in collaboration with us, and of course the Blum Center, an amazing work. But we need more collaboration between university researchers and the community. So if you have ideas for a research project, a community engaged research project, we would love to hear about it and see what we can do about moving that forward.
Great, thank you, Marcos. And also to, this idea of future research going forward, we have a couple of messages in the chat. Jared Schwartz says, see in the next report, there's been a concerted effort to address educational equity over the last 2+ years, lots of data and lots of learning. I'd love to see this in the next report and happy to share. And Beth Pitt in August agreed as well and said, agree with Jared, K-12 and higher ed attainment and barriers would be helpful as well. And then we also had, again, relating a a bit to education as well as care for our children. Megan Harris notes looking at access at affordable quality care for our children 0 to 5 and school age during out of school time also disproportionately impacts low income individuals, minority groups, single parents, etc. A big conversation we have had is, the lack of data on the K through 12 education within the report. This is definitely something that we are working with other researchers, other community organizations, who have data and have connections to include within the next report. Yeah, Marcos.
Yeah, I also saw on the chat there references to criminal justice reform, and that's another very intersectional issue that is we need to address, including the school to prison pipeline. And so that is one of that we need to come together as a community and a broader region. So the fund will be looking to partner with a number of groups, including the League of Women Voters, to convene a regional effort around a regional convening around criminal justice reform, much needed. And that'll be a long-term project, but one that we should be able to make some inroads in the future. But there are a number of really important criminal justice reform campaigns and efforts going on between Oxnard and Lompoc that we really need to begin to work together, see how we can share best practices and resources. And then, as was mentioned earlier about the philanthropic sector, the fund often has funders briefings on different topic areas. We've done it on environmental and climate justice. We've done it on immigrant rights and immigrant integration and defense. And I think the next one really needs to be around two areas: one, gun violence, and criminal justice reform. So stay tuned for that. And if anyone has any interest in those areas, please contact us at the fund so we can include you in those convenings.
Great, thank you. And I see another hand raised from Vashti Wilson. Go ahead.
Hi, and thank you. I had to jump in from another meeting, so I was about 30 minutes late to this one. So I apologize if what I'm about to ask has already been addressed. I am here on behalf of my daughter's company. She has a company called Maddie's Treasure Box. And our aim is to present a curriculum, a digital curriculum that offers representation and inclusion. And we work with schools to make that happen on campus while also providing books to the school libraries and multicultural supplies to the individual teachers. And so we work in a collaborative effort to be able to not only start a conversation with the teachers, but kind of guide them in the process, if you will. And so one of the things that I realized in entering this space, the nonprofit space, is I would be notified about a grant, for example, in an organization that I should contact, but there was no central forum that kind of lists those things out, right? And so it was kind of by word of mouth or who you know. It would be great if there was a central database in which nonprofits could kind of go and, depending on what the area of interest was, to be able to follow a line, if you will, on different grants that were available in organizations that were looking to partner to collaborate with them on that specific topic. Ours is education, and you would think that that would be relatively easy, but it's not. And ascertaining which organizations also deem that to be a focus. So I think that could be quite beneficial to the group as a whole. When I was looking at your funding for the diversity initiative, that was just, I think you just awarded 8 different organizations. I'm not sure if I'm looking at the site what the next process was, because it listed what organizations had been funded, but there wasn't a clear kind of timeline for those organizations that are now interested in applying for the upcoming. So I apologize if you already went over this, but I would love to get some more information about that.
Well, not at all. And thank you for being here today and for the work that you're doing in the community. First of all, you're absolutely right. I think we need to do better, the philanthropic sector, getting together on the availability of grant opportunities that are out there. I know NPRN does an incredible job in that regard. Also, in terms of the county racial equity funds, We did allocate, granted out some this first cycle. Let's cross our fingers. The Board of Supervisors is going to be meeting in their June budget. And there's a really good probability of another pool of funds that we'll be able to grant out to groups. And so we'll definitely keep you informed on that, about the availability of those funds. And if you need technical assistance regarding an application, the fund is very happy to help groups work that process and navigate that. But thank you so much for sharing.
Is the funding cycle for the June group that's coming up, is that already closed?
No, not at all. We'll find out by the Board of Supervisors if the funds are even going to be available, which we believe they will be, but we have to wait for them to pass their budget in June.
Okay.
And then we'll inform folks after that.
Okay, very good.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, and it looks like we've had some folks put some great resources in the chat as well. So I would definitely encourage you to look at that. Just top of my mind, definitely NPRN, the wonderful platform that's hosting us today. Just a wealth of information. A lot of work has gone into the grants database as well. So would highly encourage you.
Are we going to have a copy of that chat, or does it need to be screenshot?
I will absolutely, there has been just such a wealth of information shared in the chat today. So I think we'll definitely be synthesizing the resources that were in the chat and some of those conversations, and including the NPRN Grant Center links. So yes, we'll definitely follow up with that.
Thank you.
Great. And I do see one comment in the chat from Walida Fifi, who says, keep holding us at UCSB accountable. We will want to work even more closely together to demand structural change at the highest levels of UCSB. Sorry, I'm just going to go ahead and read that again. Walid says, keep holding us at UCSB accountable. We will want to work even more closely together to demand structural change at the highest levels of UCSB to create a climate that supports, does not put up barriers against community-centered activities. Thank you so much for that, Walid. One, important aspect to the work that we've been able to do through the Regional Equity Initiative is work closely with the UCSB Blum Center on Poverty, Inequality, and Democracy, led by Dr. Alice O'Connor, who just is incredible and really understands and advocates for community engaged research. So we really encourage any researchers or anyone connected to UCSB here today to start to think about what those networks look like, and if you're a researcher, how to get involved with community engaged research. The Fund for Santa Barbara and Blum Center, certainly great resources, but we have such a wealth of community organizations and a wealth of skills and resources at the university, which I think is what makes us, one, just a really pretty dynamic region. So would love to see further partnership going forward. That's definitely something we're committed to as a community organization, is helping to foster and facilitate and connect community organizations to researchers, because really, as we've mentioned, community organizations know their communities the best, and know what issues there are, to kind of bring our conversation back, like what anecdotal examples there are. And so being able to pair that with the power of research tools, I think can lead to some really, really impactful data that can then be used for impactful advocacy and real change towards advancing equity within the region.
Can I just mention also it looks like there's a lot of interest and more information about foundation grants development work and reaching out to the philanthropic sector for funding. The fund on our website does have a series of trainings that were done on grants development for social change. You might want to check that out. It's really super informative and really helpful for those folks who are looking at seeking foundation grant support as well.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you so much. That just about takes us to the end of our time here together today. I just want to really uplift a lot of appreciation and gratitude for all of you who are here today and for the work that you're engaged with, whether you're here on behalf of a community organization, a business or research entity, or just here yourself as an individual advocate. Really appreciate the work that you're doing and really appreciate your engagement. And just to give you a bit of an insight into what our process of moving forward looks like, the Fund for Santa Barbara is committed to advancing equity within the capacity building program, which is the program that I manage. We're collaborating with organizations to build a more regional approach to the work that we're doing, as well as utilizing the regional equity framework in our capacity building work, in our grant making work, and really making sure that all that we do is done from an equity lens. In terms of our partnership with the Blum Center at UCSB, we're committed to updating the data that's in the regional equity study, as well as exploring further collaborations into more specific issue areas with other organizations and researchers. Series of convenings to bring together individuals and organizations from different sectors. As Marcos mentioned, we've had a really engaging conversation with policymakers and philanthropic leaders, and we'll be doing deeper engagement work, as well as deeper engagement work with community members here today. We would love to continue this conversation and continue to uplift not only the work that you're doing, but opportunities for partnership and collaboration. And we're also committed to facilitating funding for community engaged research. That does include seed funding for projects through the Blum Center. The app call for proposals closes, I believe, this week, but there will be more funding available. So definitely encourage you to stay connected with the Blum Center and the Fund for Santa Barbara to develop research relationships. And we will be hosting another event here, so stay tuned with NPRN to really get to hear from a panel discussion of organizations who have already started to implement data from the Regional Equity Study and the framework from the Regional Equity Initiative into the work that they're doing. So again, just want to thank you all so much. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to reach out to me. I'll put my email in the chat, but just always happy to be with community. Marcos?
Marcos, are you muted? Oh, there you are.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Can you hear me now? Okay,
Yes.
Great. Again, I want to thank you, Kathleen, and much thanks to the team of NPRN and all of you for the work you do day to day to serve our communities and make this a better world. Once again, we are all works in progress with the opportunity to grow and learn as individuals and as organizations. And we also have the opportunity to grow and learn to be more effective together as we build our collective capacity to make this a more just and equitable world. We can do this. Si se puede. Again, thank you all so much.
Thank you so much to both of you, Marcos, Kathleen. Thank you for that presentation. That was just, excellent to elevate all those resources and all the attendees who added so many, great points and great resources in the chat. We'll definitely make sure to synthesize all of those and get that out to you. And stay tuned for part 2 of this series. So I think with that, we'll go ahead and close it out. Thank you all so much and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.